Whether you're here for some magical planeswalking or you're just here to crawl out through the fallout, you come to the right podcast. Welcome to Head Games.
Greetings and salutations, everybody. My name is Zombie Apocalypse. In the Wasteland, they call me Steve.
Hello again, friends and opponents. I'm Jetterex, but the super mutants call me Tim.
Thank you for joining us today on the Head Games Commander podcast, where we talk about the Magic the Gathering Commander format. Tim, what are we talking about today?
So today, surprising no one who's been paying attention so far, we are going to talk about Fallout. Most specifically, we're gonna dive into what we are calling a Commander Spotlight. We'll do a deep dive into one of our Commander decks, describing the deck strategy, what we love about the Commander, some of our favorite cards in the deck.
So today's deck is Tim's. I guess I should point over here. It's from the Commander Precons. Who do we have today, and what's the rule zero?
So it turns out I picked this commander pretty early on after the Fallout precons came out, and I am not anywhere close to the only person who is really excited about this commander. It's very widely popular, and it is the Wise Mothman. For those who don't know, the Wise Mothman is a character in Fallout 76, which happens in Appalachia, where there's all these cryptids and monsters of lore. So the Mothman comes to life in the Fallout universe. So the Wise Mothman, the magic card, is 1 in Sultai, black, green, blue, total of 4 mana. It's a 3/3 legendary creature. It's an insect mutant and has flying. Whenever the Wise Mothman enters the battlefield or attacks, each player gets a rad counter. Whenever one or more non-land cards are milled, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to X target creatures, where X is the number of non-land cards milled this way. Lots of text. It's way easier in practice than it is to kind of like hash out the details of what that means. And we should also talk at least a little bit about what rad counters are. So rad counters are a counter that a player gets, and they trigger at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase. So after your draw step, you resolve rad counters. And so you mill however many cards you have, however many rad counters you have. Each time you get a land, effectively nothing happens. Each time you get a non-land, you lose a life and you lose a rad counter. So with the Mothman on the board, he triggers in that second option. So when lands mill, nothing happens. When non-lands mill, he gets that secondary effect where he's adding +1/+1 counters. So my rules... Go ahead.
I have one question. So there's a card specifically that I'm thinking of, Sphinx of the Second Sun, where he gives you a second beginning phase where it's untap, upkeep, and draw. Would the rad counters trigger then too?
I would have to look. My knee jerk is no, because I believe that it's actually it's not going off on your draw step. It's going off on your main phase.
Oh, is that so? I wasn't sure because of the way it says after your draw phase. So I wasn't sure if I gave myself.
So that's tricky, right? And I think then please correct us if we're wrong here. But so when something says that after your draw step, what it's actually saying is at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase. But after your draw step is way less words.
Yeah. Okay.
So sagas happen like this as well, and I was confused by sagas for a long time because I thought the abilities were going off during the draw step because it says after the draw step, but that's not the case. You are in your pre-combat main phase, so I think that's the case here. So I don't believe it'd be interesting, though.
We'll have to look it up after the show.
Yeah. So, rule 0 for the Wise Mothman, I built mine with mostly a +1/+1 counters theme. After playing with the commander, it seemed that when you got the commander out and you had good luck with the rad counters, you were getting a lot of +1/+1 counters very quickly. And essentially, it makes the commander, if it's not dealt with, a very lethal threat very quickly. And it happened enough times in just casual pre-con games that I thought to myself, I think you could just build it in this direction. with the plus one counters theme. Because there's also mill going on, because there's also rad counters, you can kind of build on those themes as well with a small reanimator package, with a small benefits from mill package. But really, mine is a plus one counters deck mostly. You know, that is what it's built to do. That's what I would say in the rule zero conversation.
Pretty sweet.
So next we'll talk about like our kind of impressions of the deck as we played it over time. I, as somebody who have piloted it, Zombie as somebody who has kind of played against it a couple of times. So having sat at a table with this deck, what do you think are its strengths and weaknesses?
So one of the strengths that I've noticed is that your creatures just get so big. There's no
They do.
such thing as a profitable block against any of your creatures. There's some creatures in here that if you block, it's just going to hurt you even more. So like, it's a pretty aggressive deck, and man, Mothman with his flying, surprisingly evasive, and like in 3 turns of the Mothman, like honestly, that's a one shot kill to anybody. So I will say one of the weaknesses is if you get rid of the Mothman, you're not doing as much as you would like. So the best thing is to just kind of kill your commander over and over and over again until you can't cast it anymore. So it's not a crazy like, oh, you have to tear the deck apart because it's won't run without it, but it just doesn't work as well without your commander. So what do you think your strengths and weaknesses are, being one that's behind the wheels?
So I agree with your assessment that especially about the weakness that it doesn't run the same way because the commander is designed to mill and to spread counters out. It obviously runs way better when it's there. And I think that like the more I think about it, I build all my decks that way.
Right.
I think that like as we've gone through this process and you know talked about each other's decks a whole lot, I realized that that's the weakness of all of my decks, and it is one. There's no question, but that is 100% the kind of deck I want to build. I'm not really here to put a commander for its color identity. Like I'm really
Right.
here to cast the commander and have the commander do what it is supposed to do. So
Yeah.
as far as strengths go, I think actually I really love I don't have a lot of graveyard shenanigans decks. It's not really something that I've played a lot recently. So this one has been very fun for that reason, and
Right.
it can be very strong for that reason. Is that when when you dump something, one of the really expensive spells into the graveyard, and my top end in this deck is not as scary as a lot of reanimator top ends are. I could get it there, but I did kind of build this on a budget. So, but really, there are still some pretty amazing things that when you're casting them for 2 with animate dead, it really that's amazing, and you get such a great advantage for that. So I also think that like I don't play. I've mostly been playing 2 color decks for a really long time. So 3 colors really adds a level of diversity and versatility that I don't usually get. So that really allowed me to kind of put a lot of things, which that's a strength on one hand. But I'll say that the biggest weakness I think that this deck has is that it hasn't really found its identity yet.
That's fair.
I say that I built it in the plus one direction, and that is true, but it's still trying to be other things. So I think that as I refine this, one of the things that's almost certainly going to happen is I'm gonna get it closer to being dedicated in one direction or another. And because it's spread in those different directions, sometimes I end up with a mismatch of cards.
Your top end's nothing to shake a stick at. Like just looking at the list, like I mean, everyone's gonna scoff when they see a Vorinclux Monsters Raider coming out.
It's
Like
true.
your top end, nothing to shake a stick at. I would be afraid to see a lot of these cards. So just
Yeah.
because it's a budget top end doesn't mean it's not a good one.
And I know it's really counterintuitive to say it's a budget top end, but Vorinclex is in there. I have one. I
Yeah,
already I had one. It wasn't already in a deck. Actually, that's not true. It was in a deck, but it was in a deck that I don't play very much, and it was in a deck that I was really kind of feeling like it could do without it. So I didn't feel bad about pulling it over here. So, building on a budget meant I slapped together with the cards that I had and spent very little money on it. But I
Perks.
also am a whale
I was about to
and
say
have a
perks of us being a
collection.
whale, right?
Right, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean that's really it. I think that I'm definitely looking forward to working with this deck more, trying to find more of an identity. And it is really tough when you get into multiple colors because there's just so many cool options, different things that you can do. And I wasn't really sure which way I wanted to go with it, but it's still been a lot of fun. I guess that's another strength of it is that I actually really have enjoyed piloting this deck just about every time that I've played it.
Oh, there is one more weakness. It dies to a turn two Godo combo.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's really weak against turn two Godo kills. It just
It
is.
just is.
I mean if I don't have Assassin's Trophy,
What were you thinking?
hey,
Should have had it in your
there
hand
you
the whole
go.
time.
Should have had it.
All
That's
right.
right.
I think it's time to move on.
So in the next section, we're gonna kind of break down the deck using what we consider to be kind of traditional statistics. These are the things most people look at. We also like to use a website called Card Realms to run our deck list through, just to get kind of an objective viewpoint on the power level. The 1 to 10 scale can be arbitrary, so we run all of our decks through this filter. We don't necessarily agree with their assessment, but at least we're using the same measuring stick each time.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna let Steve give the breakdown of the power level on card realms and all the different traditional statistics.
All right. The power level on Card Realms is 6. The card draw is 12. The ramp is 10. Single target removal is 5. And board wipes are 2. So let's go
Before we
into.
move on,
Oh,
before we move on, I want to ask you this because this has been kind of eating my head a little bit. You look at those numbers before knowing you know the deck, but try to suspend that for a moment.
okay.
You look at those. You look at those numbers. Is that bad?
No,
Like you look at those. Is there anything that you go? I think there should be more of this or less of this.
honestly, I think I probably would go with a little bit more ramp. I've noticed and
Really?
yeah. So like I've been leaning towards like 12 to 15 ramp cards index
I I
and
remember you
12 to
saying the
15,
15.
yeah.
I remember you saying the 50 number right at some point, right?
Right.
Like
Yep.
that you figure out how many lands do you have, and then you should have ramp to round that number out to 50. So you basically have
Yep.
50 different, so half of your deck is either lands or getting you 2 more mana.
Yep.
So this would be a little short because I think I have 37 lands in the deck. So I would only be at 47. I'd be a little short. So a little more ramp, you say. What else?
Well, when you have more ramp like that, more card draws inevitable. Like you're gonna need things to do with that mana. So if you can find, I would probably go up to, I think the new magic numbers is 15 draw, 15 ramp. Like that's like the baseline. Now,
Interesting.
depending on what your commander does, also changes that too. So like for instance, your commander, since you do intend to use your graveyard as a added resource, so maybe you don't need 15 card draw, you need 12 card draw and maybe 10 cards that pull cards from your graveyard that doesn't really constitute as card draw.
Right. That makes sense. That if you're using this other resource as
Yeah,
card advantage, not necessarily draw.
right.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I think the new magic number is 15, 15. I think single target, like I'm all for letting people do what they want to do. So like I've been toning down the targeted removal. So I think 5 and 2, I wouldn't go more than 3 board wipes and I wouldn't go more than like 8 single targeted.
So in both of those cases, though, I would still go higher with those numbers. Because what I've
Yes.
noticed lately, what's really come up for me is that I have lost so many games because I have not drawn interaction. And like
Yeah,
we've had quite a few games recently where somebody just runs away with the game and nobody interacts with it.
right, right.
And then, so we played a game the other day and somebody brought it up at the end, like, is anybody else playing with interaction? It's hard to find the Goldilocks zone of this is the right amount of interaction to make the game feel interactive but still fun. Like
Yeah.
I'm still trying to figure that out, and I'm with you. I really kind of want to let people do what they're doing, but I also don't just want to. I just don't want to just get run over. So
Yeah.
I'm actually think. Well, so I asked you that question because I feel like
I
I'm gonna
think
start
eight's
putting
probably going to be
more.
sitting where I would want to sit at
So
because
even so that even by that measurement, this is a little light.
right, right.
Yeah,
Now it
yeah.
also depends. Like if your single target removal is recurable, you probably don't need as much. Especially like I mean in this particular case, I don't think it is. So maybe that's something that we should probably lean towards because I 100% agree with you. I've gotten away with some games where it's just like I won because no one interacted with me, and
Yep.
like things just get crazy. And like if they
Mhm.
removed one piece at the right time, I get set far enough back that other people are in the lead now. So yeah, maybe that's a topic we should have on a whole episode about. But that's for a different day. So we're gonna go ahead and go. We're gonna segue into cards that fit the theme of each specific stat. We each picked a card that we liked in each stat, and we're gonna talk about it and gush over them a little bit. So what card did you bring for the card draw section?
Card draw. This one, and you'll find a theme real quick in mine. I'll spoil the fun now. A lot of my choices are cards that were in the pre-con because they're just designed to go with this commander, but they also like kind of uniquely synergize. So for card draw, for me, it was Mirelurk Queen. So this is it's 4 and a blue for a 4/4 crab mutant with vigilance. When it enters the battlefield, target player gets 2 rad counters. When one or more non-land cards are milled, you draw a card and put a +1/+1 counter on Mirelurk Queen. This ability triggers only once each turn. So it works really well with the Mothman because if everybody continues to get rad counters from the Mothman, you can get a card draw on each player's turn.
Seems pretty
And with
solid.
the +1/+1 counters theme, like when those two are both on the field together and they're both, the Mothman's continually giving rad counters, I found this to be kind of a house. It usually gets, 2 or 3 cards on the first go around, and then after that it continues to snowball. And then it's also getting bigger that whole time as well. So if you have Mothman out with this, maybe it's getting counters for Mothman and it's getting counters for itself. So it comes,
It's double
it gets
dipping, man.
right. It goes around the table once and usually comes out the other side a 6/6 or an 8/8, and then it's still going to continue to draw you cards. So this one's always I've always loved to see this one.
And
How about you? What card did
well,
you pick?
I wanted to actually add on the fact that it has vigilance just makes that card so much better because it's a
Right.
great attacker and a great blocker.
Hmm.
So that card just does everything you want it to do. Like I'm
Yep.
glad you picked it. So
I'm a
I
fan.
I'm a huge fan too. So I picked Toothy, imaginative friend, imaginary friend. It does partner with pure imaginative rascal. It says whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on Toothy, the imaginary friend, and then when Toothy leaves the battlefield, draw cards for each +1/+1 counter on it. So like this card, if it sits on the table for one turn after a Mothman has done its thing, it's getting counters from Mothman. It's giving counters to itself. It's like you're gonna draw 20 cards. This is one of those cards that like you need to kill it immediately or you lose the game. So it's just doing everything you want it to do. It's a great attacker too because of how big it gets.
Hmm.
So uh,
And when they don't want to kill it, they don't want to block it and kill it because then you're going to draw all the cards. I love that it's a leaves the battlefield trigger and not a
mhm.
dice trigger
Oh, it just
because
makes
it
it so
really
much
it
better.
makes it so much better. Makes it like not a great path to exile target anymore. And I just love that this is a partner card, and I do play with both halves of this
Hmm.
partner in here. I got these two for a different deck a while ago and ended up cutting them from the other deck because it just went in another direction. It was just doing something very
Right.
different, and these never really filled the niche that I want them to. But I would say that these are probably the first edition that I made. Like when I, kind of tore the pre-con apart and looked down, it was like, what's going to definitely go in here? And I'm like, Pier and Toothy are immediately going in this because they both fulfill the +1/+1 counter theme.
They both do exactly what this deck is trying to do, and they do
Right.
it spectacularly.
And they get each other not just in a like I
Right.
know you and I see you kind of way. They literally draw each other out of the
It's
deck,
literally you
which
play one, you get the other. So like they're
right.
together all the time. So so we're gonna go ahead and go into the ramp cards. What ramp card did you pick for us today?
This one's boring as far as I'm concerned, but this is a pet card of mine. I play it. I have lots of decks that play this card because I just think that it's very good, and it's Gyre Sage. Most people who played Commander long enough know what it does. It's an elf druid, 1 and a green for a 1/2 with Evolve, which means whenever a creature with higher power or toughness enters the battlefield, this gets a +1/+1 counter, and then you can tap it to add a green for each +1/+1 counter on it. So it's a mana dork that doesn't dork by itself, but it scales with +1/+1 counters. So in any green +1/+1 counters themes deck, this is a pretty auto include. It's fantastic with the Mothman because if you're getting multiple +1/+1 counter triggers, you can put one on your commander and one on the Gyre Sage. It makes for very explosive mana acceleration.
I mean, we played a game with Gyre Sage on the battlefield and it tapped for 19 green mana, I think it was.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right.
Like you sometimes you don't even need to tap it for 19 green mana. But when you do, you're doing some good stuff.
Right. It feels like you're ahead at that point.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, there's yeah,
How
perfect
about you?
include.
What was your ramp card?
So my ramp card was Tato Farmer. Oh man, this card just speaks near and dear to my heart. It does everything I want it to do. It's a 3 mana zombie mutant peasant. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may get 2 rad counters. And then put target land card into a graveyard that was milled this turn onto the battlefield under your control tapped. Let me tell you, you can steal your opponent's stuff, and it's just hilarious. Like it has a landfall trigger. You want to get those rad counters. You're doing great things with those rad counters. When you mill these things, you get the lands, and I love just pulling lands from my graveyard. Like I kind of want to put this in Windgrace, but I don't have enough mill to do it. So
Right.
it probably
It
won't make it.
This is one of those cards that's like it's 50 cents for a reason, right? It's only ever really going to see play in this deck, but as with a lot of other cards that were in the pre-con, it's very well designed to do specifically what it's going to do. But they added that bit where you get to steal lands from other people's graveyards, which
Mm-hmm.
really I have some conflict about stealing people's stuff. Like I know it's fun, but there's a lot of bad feels there. But there's lands feel safe. I could steal your lands from your graveyard, and you're probably just gonna think
As long as it's from the
whatever.
graveyard. If you were to start
Right.
steal, there's a card with cumulative upkeep, steal an opponent's lands. Um, that's the kind of mean stuff that you really don't want to play in the world of Commander, but
You might not get invited back there, yeah.
definitely
But
not.
it's okay from the graveyard, right? And
It's
Tato Farmer
okay
is just
from
like
the graveyard. It's always
it's
okay
just
from the graveyard.
it is. And I actually think that the landfall getting the rad counters is actually pretty huge. Even though it's just you getting them, I almost always pick myself when there's only one option
Right.
because the deck definitely does want to mill itself because it's got, reanimator sub themes to it. So it definitely does want to target itself. So having that on a landfall trigger is really fantastic. So pretty solid. It is just ramping you one each turn, but adding another land each turn, we all know that that snowballs real quick.
Yeah, I mean, it's recurable ramp. Like it's ramp that you can do over and over and over again. And lands are safe from people. So like you're not gonna like they're not
Right.
gonna destroy those lands. So and plus you want rad counters anyway, so just having that added benefit of getting more rad counters is nice too. So let's get into single target removal. What did you pick out for us today?
I picked a controversial choice here, and we
Uh-oh.
already talked about this, but so When I ran this through Card Realms, it identified six, and they don't actually say single targeted removal in their breakdown. They just say removal, and I'm pretty sure that this is the sixth card because I identified five single targeted removals in the deck. This was not on that list, so but I chose it because I do think it qualifies, and I think it is just an amazing card, especially in this deck, and it is Sheoldred, no sub name. Just Sheoldred.
Just shielded.
So just Sheoldred. Sheoldred is 3 and 2 black for a 4/5 with Menace for Phyrexian Praetor. When Sheoldred enters the battlefield, each opponent sacrifices a non-token creature or planeswalker. You can pay 4 and a black to flip it to its saga backside. You can only do this if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. So mill themed deck, I can usually get somebody to 8 cards without too much effort. The backside is where it really gets juicy. The True Scriptures is Saga. First chapter is for each opponent to destroy up to one target creature or planeswalker that player controls. So as soon as it flips, it gets that. Second chapter is each opponent discards 3 cards, then mills 3 cards. Last chapter is Rise of the Dark Realms. Put all creature cards from all graveyards onto the battlefield under your control, and then exile the True Scriptures and return it to the battlefield as Sheoldred. So most of the time when I play this card, I actually am casting it and flipping it in the same turn.
That's what happened
And
last night.
right, that is backbreaking because everybody sacrifices a non-token creature, which sometimes people have fodder, but sometimes they don't. So sacrificing one non-token creature, because we get incremental or incidental tokens all the time. So skipping over tokens really is impactful.
Makes it really good.
But then when it flips, I get to target something. So you're sacrificing the one that you choose, but then I'm targeting whatever is left over. And in the game we just played with this, I was also able to proliferate in that same turn. So I was able to get the second chapter as well. It really is like it's practically a win condition at that point.
Oh,
I
you
really
won that
broke
game because of that, like that like 9 mana sequence or whatever it is.
It's 10.
10. But you won the game because of that 10 mana. Like no question.
That's right. Yep. And so I see this like, yes, it's not single targeted removal, but it is removal. It is kind of keeping everybody in check, to some degree. But I really see it as a win condition under the right circumstances. So I think it's a pretty amazing card.
Yeah. I 100% agree. And it absolutely fits perfectly in this deck. So we're gonna go ahead and go to mine. And I chose I cheated a little bit because it's also a great enchantment. I chose Locthwain Scorn and Virtue of Persistence. So Virtue of Persistence is a 7 mana enchantment. I'll read that in a minute. So this Locthwain Scorn is a 2 mana sorcery. It says target creature gets -3/-3 until end of turn. You gain 3 life or 2 life. That's really not the reason why I picked this card. But it does target and it does remove creatures. However, I picked it because of the other side. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, this is the 7 mana enchantment side. At the beginning of your upkeep, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control.
A graveyard.
Oh my god. I never known it said a graveyard until just now.
Yeah. I play enough standard that this card is it's pretty regular right now. It's and it really both halves of this are very impactful in that kind of format. The removal side of this card is not as impactful in Commander, but there are plenty of juicy targets at 3 toughness or less. I'm saying even some commanders. So like it's not without target, and really you can kind of be a little wasteful with that first half early in the game because you have the card in exile for the rest of the game. So it's like you didn't actually lose a card in your hand at all, which is what makes adventures so good. Everybody knows that.
Adventures are great. We should go on an adventure together to the next category. Oh, did you like that segue? We're going to talk.
That was amazing.
We're going to talk about the only 2 board wipes that you have in the deck. So
whatever I want our listeners to know that I actually added a second board wipe, so I would have to I because I only had one in my original
Oh
deck list. So
no.
I put this one back in, and I actually think that it was a really good choice to put it back in because again, there was a reason that this was in the pre-con. And what's really fun about this one in the pre-con is the art for this card in the Fallout Precon is a rad toad, and it's amazing. I love it so
Adorable.
much. So it's Find Finality. It's a split card. The first find is two hybrid black green, so two black or two green or one of each. And it's sorcery to return up to two target creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. So the front half of it gets, if you've milled a lot of cards, you get to pull two creature cards back to your hand. Decent rate for it as well. And then finality is the back half, and that's the board wipe half for a black and a green. You may put two +1/+1 counters on a creature you control, and then all creatures get -4/-4. So not a board wipe that absolutely blows up everything. -4/-4 is usually enough to mitigate most of what's going on. So I do, but it also puts +1/+1 counters on one of your creatures, usually allowing it to survive it. So I think because of the versatility, it's a pretty solid choice for this deck.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one. I actually kind of like you can almost look at Find as like a little bit of card draw for you as well.
Oh,
Because
yeah,
like you're
that's a
just
good point.
drawing cards from your graveyard and you're drawing just creatures. I think cards like that are kind of like, especially that you're getting two for two man, like you're getting two cards. Like I've been hearing a lot of people you referring to like the Tango lands as card draw because you're just drawing a land. Um so I
Interesting.
yeah, so like when you like put things in certain perspectives, like this is card draw and it's also a board wipe. It's not the board wipe side's a little bit expensive, but most of your creatures aren't going to die from it anyway, so like it seems to fit pretty well.
It kind of has the capacity to be one-sided under a pretty narrow set of
Right.
circumstances, but when it does work that way, I do think that there's probably better options. But I do think that the versatility of it and the being able to use the other half of it when you don't need a board wipe makes
Right.
it a pretty good inclusion.
Right. It's a shame it doesn't have fuse like some of the split
Right.
cards, right?
Wouldn't it be great to do both?
Yeah,
Man,
it'd be
that would
awesome.
make this way better.
Why am I not working for Wizards? So Wizards of the Coast, I know you're listening. Um, uh, I'll put my email in the thing below. Just email me with a job offer. I'm pretty sure I'll take it. And
Yeah, as
yeah,
long as it's remote, right?
as long as it's remote, I'm kind of stuck where I'm at. You know, wife, kids. I'm pretty sure they don't want us to move to California.
Right, right. So how about tell us about the only other board wipe in the deck.
So the only other board wipe in the deck, and it's like a gem. I love this card. I'm putting it in Wind Grace. Like that's how much this card is amazing. It's also just a win con too, if you have enough mana. So the card we're talking about is Nuclear Fallout. Each creature gets, sorry, it's 2 black and X for a sorcery. Each creature gets twice -X until end of turn. Each player gets X rad counters. Reason why it's going in Wind Grace is because if I do this for 40, people are dying. And they're all going to die before me. Because if they don't die, I might die. But I have plenty of land.
Yeah,
We'll be all right.
you'd
But it
be all
is
right.
Nuclear Fallout. Like that, like it, the name says it all. And it's just a great card. I love this card a lot. I think it fits in a lot of decks, not just this one.
Yeah, if you're in a black deck and you also want to be filling your graveyard, as well as everybody else's, because black decks can pull from other people's graveyards, as we just talked about. And so, yeah, it has that extra benefit for sure. So this a lot of people peg this pretty early on as an all star, just an all-star printing that this card had a lot of options for other decks as well. So obviously it was already in the precon. No reason not to keep it there. It's built for this deck, so it was the obvious include.
Well, so I'm going to compare this to another card, Black Sun Zenith, where I think Black Sun is 2 black and X. And yes, it's X counters, but this does double. So for just 3 mana, you're giving all creatures -2/-2. Like
Right.
it scales so well, and you can just do it for the amount that you need it. So you can have your stuff live and everyone else's stuff die.
Yeah,
It
right on scale
mutilates,
with
mutilate, and
it,
languish, yeah, or languish specifically. Sorry.
right. So languish, if you cast mutilate when you have 4 swamps, it's a 4/4. But yeah, languish is -4/-4, 4/4.
Hmm.
-2/-2 for 3 is a pretty standard rate for kind of sorcery speed
Yeah,
cards of that nature. But as soon as you get to X's 3, now you're -6/-6. That's probably everything on the board. 4 is -8/-8, almost certainly everything on the board. So yes, it
it
scales
scales
incredibly
so
well.
well.
And imagine in that game, whether I had the Gyre Sage that has 19 counters on it, I could probably cast a nuclear fallout
Yeah,
that doesn't kill my Gyre Sage,
and it kills
but
everybody
all
else.
but it kills everything else. Yep.
Oh, it kills everyone too. Like 20 rad
And then it kills
counters.
everyone.
20
hmm
rad counters is nothing to cough at.
And who knows? Maybe I have strong out and I'm gaining life when I mill cards. Who
You
knows?
know, who knows? Who knows? But we're going to get to strong later, aren't we? Oh, I guess not.
No, I,
No
I don't think
strong.
Strong made the list today, but Strong's a good card. Go look it up.
Yeah, he's great. Well, we'll have a picture there. Anyway, so we're gonna go ahead and go into we're gonna go into the spotlight of the themes of the deck. So what are the themes or goals of your deck?
So again, I like my definitely tried to go in a +1/+1 counters thing, but I tried to break down like the 4 different areas where I dedicated cards to, because again, with Mothman, so the first one's mill, because cards that just generically mill with the Mothman on board create +1/+1 counters. So mill is its own kind of sub theme. Obviously, cards that improve your ability with +1/+1 counters are important to the deck. So that's the second theme. Graveyard recursion. Reanimating creatures became the third sub theme, because I was already dumping a bunch of cards into my deck. It made sense to do some graveyard shenanigans.
Right.
And then finally, rad counters as its own theme, because really you want to make sure that you do have, because as you pointed out, if the commander isn't there, you really do still want to be giving rad counters out because you want to be milling, you want everyone else to be milling.
Yep. I think.
So the first one is Mill. So the card I picked for this is again, it's kind of a new pet card of mine. I like this card a lot. And it's called Blossoming Tortoise. It's from Wilds of Eldraine. So it's 2/2 green for a 3/3 turtle. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, mill 3 cards and then return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Also has some other stuff. Activated abilities of lands you control cost 1 less. Land creatures you control get +1/+1, which I don't think I actually have any in the deck. Which as soon as I put this card on the list, I was like, maybe I should. Maybe I should put them in here just because the tortoise is in here. This card really it ramps you when you cast it almost always. If you've already got some lands in your graveyard, especially if you're playing with fetch lands,
Mhm.
this card's very good. So it's a 4 mana ramp card, but also mills you cards, and then if you get to attack with it the next turn, you get to do it again. So it's that repeatable thing we're always talking about, where you get repeat value from
Right.
it. I just think it's very solid for the rate.
So I was actually looking in your land section. I only noticed 3 activated abilities of things for your lands. Karn's Bastion is being one,
Oh,
which is a really good one where it just makes it a one cheaper and it makes it nice. Uh, then there's Metropolis. Sorry, Mariposa Military Base. But that gets cheaper with rad counters anyway. And then the last one, this one's a doozy. It's Zagrath Trirome. You can cycle it for 2 instead of 3.
never cycling that card.
I'm just saying you can. You never know.
It is.
You might be desperate enough,
I do. No, I do know, because it is the first card that gets fetched every single time.
but
Like
it's it.
there are 3 fetch lands in the deck, and all of the ramp spells dig for a forest. I get
Yeah.
it every game.
Oh, I know you do.
I'm
I know.
never cycling that card. But point still stands. I didn't think about that. Karn's Bastion for cheaper is pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm gonna go back up and look at the card again. Before I. Because I think it also kind of ramps you too, doesn't it? Yeah, it ramps you.
It does. It ramps you. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. You have to have a land in your graveyard.
But
So,
you're
as I
milling
said,
three, so
you're milling three. I do play with fetch lands. I actually like, I opted not to play more than the ones that were in color. You can do that
right.
in any deck, really. You can play whatever fetches you want as long as they're getting the basics that you want. Which means you in a three color deck, you could play up to seven of them.
Right.
But I really just put the three that were on color just because I hate
It's also
shuffling my
expensive.
deck. Oh,
It's expensive.
it's expensive. I have them and I could
Yeah.
put them in every deck if I wanted to, but I just there's some times where it really doesn't make sense to. But this one it did. There were a couple of cards with landfall on it. This card works very well with it.
You have Conduit of
So
Worlds too, so like you're never gonna miss your
yep,
land drop. So
that's right.
it all makes sense. So we're gonna go ahead and go into mine. We're gonna go into like the milliest of most milli staple of all time, and that is Mesmeric Orb. It's a 2 mana artifact. Whenever a permanent becomes untapped, that permanent's controller puts the top card of his or her library into his or her graveyard. Man, like this thing, like you drop it, everyone's milling 6 or 7 that turn because you're not gonna drop this on turn 2. You're gonna drop this on turn 6 when everyone's tapped out and done things and attacked people. So it just vomits cards into your graveyard for everybody. It's
What what makes it so great, and I don't know that I was playing this wrong, but you pointed this out in the last game, is that the way that Mesmeric Orb works is that each time you untap a permanent, it's creating an individual trigger for this. So you're milling one card each time.
yep,
So what that actually translates to is that you get the Mothman trigger however many times, and it's not a huge difference in turn, but it matters if you have more than one creature. Because the way the Mothman is worded, if you get three non-land cards milled and you only have one creature, you only get one counter. If they
right.
get milled at the same time, because these triggers are individual, you would get all three. So it really like it works better than most other mill effects because they're single instances of milling. It may seem like a small thing, but I promise in practice it actually is very terrifying.
It is absolutely sick nasty. So but yeah, it's a classic staple that you see in all mill decks. So what can you do?
It's very funny to me. This has happened to me a lot lately. I'm very much a hater of Mill. I hate losing to Mill. It's definitely one of my least favorite, one of the cringiest things that I can experience in the game. And lately, I have been playing a lot of Mill. I played a standard deck that was a Mill deck, and I kept saying to Zombie that I had become the thing I swore to destroy.
Mm-hmm.
And this deck is a, but I don't beat people by milling in this
Oh,
deck.
you beat
Milling
people in the
it.
face with a giant Mothman.
That's exactly right. The milling is just a pathway to getting a giant
Right.
Mothman to kill people with.
And
So
I
the
think people are
plus
okay
one
with that.
count. Yeah, I'm okay with that. The plus one counters theme. The card I picked here, it also doubles as a ramp card, but it has the added benefit of increasing plus one counters, and it's Kami of Whispered Hopes. This is two and a green for a 1/1 spirit. If one or more plus one counters would be put on a permanent you control, that put that many plus one counters plus one are put on that permanent instead. So it adds an additional plus one counter whenever one is being placed. So when one or more is being placed. So if you're putting three, doesn't double them, just adds one more. Three goes to four.
Hearted
So that's
scales
what
type effect, yeah.
very much so, but it's on a body, and Kami of Whispered Hopes taps and adds X mana of any one color, where X is its power. So this, like Gyre Sage, scales as it gets more counters, but it also can create any color. So it's more expensive than Gyre Sage. It actually doesn't have a way to add counters to itself. It just has that latent ability. So it's a little harder to get going, but it still is very, very good because it increases the number of counters that all of your creatures are getting.
And Mothman's gonna do Mothman things, so
Right. So best case scenario, this is out, Mothman's out. Mothman's putting counters on both of them. This is making those counters additional. So if I'm getting or two triggers from this guy, instead of putting one counter on each of my guys, I'm putting two on each of my guys.
alrighty. So the card I picked is Marcus Mutant Mayor. He is a
Very
five
good.
he's a 5 mana 4/4 vigilance trample. Which might not be a bad thing to put in my Indominus Rex Alpha. Like that's some pretty good keywords over there. Anyway,
It's not bad.
whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. If that creature has a +1/+1 counter on it, if it doesn't, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So
Yep.
it's not going to put a whole bunch of +1/+1 counters, but it's going to draw you cards, and I think it's solid.
I love it.
Yeah,
And it does. It qualifies in this category for sure. That if you don't have the counters yet, which sometimes you don't, if you don't have the counters yet, it does that. It starts that train, but then it turns those counters into more cards later on. Like this, every time that I've gotten this, it's drawn me a boatload of cards. It's terrific.
yeah. I like Marcus
And
better.
it's a threat itself. As you
Yeah,
pointed out, vigilance and trample means as this thing gets bigger, it gets scarier, and you still get to hold it back as a blocker. It's terrific.
true story. Yeah, vigilance is way underrated. So we're gonna go.
Especially in Commander, like right, like they. I mean, I know that like there's just really it makes it so that you can be more aggressive and not have to because you're not just worrying about kickback from one person, you're worried about it from three people.
Right,
So you're way more disincentivized to attack, and vigilance completely removes that. There's no reason not to at that point.
right. So we're gonna go into the last section here, and we're gonna talk about the rad counter synergies. What cards did you pick out for us today?
Are we gonna skip Graveyard Recursion?
Did I miss that? Oh, I totally missed that. We're gonna do graveyard recursion. I'm good at
Yeah.
podcasting.
The card that I picked for Graveyard Recursion, once again, one of my favorites. If I'm in these colors, this card's going in the deck, and it is the Scarab God. I have loved this card ever since it was printed. I know I'm not alone in this one. So it's 3, a blue and a black for a 5/5 legendary god. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses X life, and you scry X, where X is the number of zombies you control, which does matter eventually, but really isn't why you play the card. You play it for the activated ability, which is 2, a blue and a black. Exile target creature card from a graveyard. Create a token that's a copy of it, except it's a 4/4 black zombie. So this is I steal your creatures. I make copies of your creature, which is in a lot of ways better because you don't get to get it back.
Never.
It removes it from your graveyard forever, and I get to have a copy of it, which I again that for whatever reason that feels okay to me. Like and we talk a lot about how on spelltable it's really hard to steal stuff. It just doesn't work out very well. But this isn't stealing stuff. This is exiling that and making a token copy, so it's a little easier to manage.
Yeah.
And when it dies, return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next upkeep, so it is more resilient than your average bear.
Yeah, it seems pretty solid to me. I love this card just as much as you do. I think you love it more, but again, like just the fact that you're exiling any creature from any graveyard it's graveyard hate too. And
It is.
now you get to also just get the best creature out of everyone's graveyard. And so what if it's not a bajillion or whatever? A 4/4 is nothing to shake a stick at either. And who cares if, your 4/4 is, a strong or the Gitrog monster or something like that too, where it's just like their power and toughness doesn't matter because they're going to get huge from what you're doing. And B,
Right.
like their abilities are so strong that it doesn't matter. Like you're getting them for their abilities as well. So I was torn on what to choose because I really love Muldrotha, the Gravetide. I was half tempted to pick that, but that's just a good Sultite card to begin with, and I was like, I don't really want to talk about that. I wanted to talk about the Master Transcendent. Okay, this guy is 1 and Sultai for a legendary artifact creature mutant. Whenever the Master Transcendent enters the battlefield, target player gets 2 rad counters. And then put target creature card in a graveyard that was milled this turn onto the battlefield under your control. It's a green mutant with base power and toughness 3/3. So it's limited when you can do it, but since everyone's milling so much already with what you're doing, it's gravy train. I want to I was actually thinking about building this commander and having like untap effects like voltaic key and I'm running like a whole bunch of clones too. So just like legendary clones that can copy it or whatever. I think it would be a fun commander to run as its own, but I think for what you've built, Mothman is way better for what you got. But this card is really, really good as well.
It is. It just it in a vacuum, and I say this a lot, in a vacuum, this card actually does a lot. You know, if it is the only thing that you're playing, you give yourself the rad counters. Very, at least in this deck, I play a very high amount of
Mm-hmm.
creatures. You know, what am I at? 38. So like
Hot
very
diggity
high
damn.
likelihood. Yeah, very high likelihood that I'm milling a creature in those two cards. So this is tapping to reanimate the next creature the following turn. And even if it's like it doesn't matter what it is, you are just it's tapping to put a creature into play. So and that's just the floor. The
Right.
ceiling is ridiculous because if you've got Mesmeric Orb and people are milling half their libraries, like you're getting the best card out of somebody's library on their turn. So
Right.
it's the ceiling is very high for this card.
Yeah, I like it a lot. It's just a lot of fun. So we're gonna go ahead and now we're gonna go ahead and get to the rad counter synergies. What
The
card?
final category.
What do we got today?
All right, so I picked Screeching Scorch Beast, and I have to make a note here. The Screeching Scorch Beast is terrifying in the game. In Fallout 76, the Screeching Scorch Beast will murder the heck out of you the first time you run into it, and you will not know what's happening because you will run away from it because that's what you do at first when you see something you've never seen before, and it hunts you down and murders you. It's so great. It's been a long time since I've had that happen in a game, and I loved it very much. Screeching Scorch Beast is it's 6 mana, 4 and 2 black for a 5/5 bat mutant. It has flying and menace.
Hmm,
When it attacks, each player gets 2 rad counters.
nice.
When one or more non-land cards are milled, you may create that many 2/2 zombie mutant creature tokens. Do this only once each turn. So it again synergizes with itself
Yeah.
that whenever people are resolving their rad counters, you're probably getting zombies on each person's turn. So you resolve this. And obviously, Lightning Greaves is in the deck. So if it's possible for you to get this down and get some rad counters on everybody, by the time it comes back around, you've got a 5/5 flying menace and a horde of zombies. It's awesome.
Yeah, it seems pretty solid. I appreciate the fact that it only triggers once each turn.
Yes,
Because that's how things get busted in Commander when they don't put that cap on it. I do like that trend where where Wizards of the Coast is putting once each turn. Um,
yep.
keep it up, Wizards. This isn't me just trying to get a job. This is me actually giving praise where praise is due. Yeah,
Hire him. Hire him, please.
please.
Okay.
All right, we're anyway. Uh, yeah. So that card's great. Does everything you want it to do. So we're gonna go into mine, and that is Bloatfly Swarm. This card is silly. I've only seen it in play once, and it absolutely was terrifying. So what the
Yeah.
Bloatfly Swarm is the 4 mana flying insect mutant. Base power 0/0, but when it enters the battlefield, put 5+1/+1 counters on it. If damage was dealt to blowfly swarms while it has +1/+1 counters on it, prevent that damage, remove that many counters from it, and give each player a rad counter for each +1/+1 counter removed this way. Oh my god, it's insane because then you mill, then you put counters back on it. It was so hard to deal with. And the fact that each player gets the rad counters just makes it insane. You would think that these little bloat flies that you don't have problems with in the game, actual Fallout, isn't a problem. But in Magic the Gathering, bloat flies swarm is terrifying. It's
Yeah. I mean, 5/5 flyer for 4 is pretty good on curve as it is.
Mhm.
5/5 flyer on curve that also is really hard to remove because if you mentioned before about profitably blocking, you can't profitably block this thing. I mean, the best case scenario is if you have a way to kill this without having to block it or do damage for it. This you want to do that because otherwise it's just going to get out of hand.
That touch doesn't work against this thing either, does it? Because it prevents the damage.
because it prevents the damage. That sounds right.
Wow. Oh my god. This card is
Yeah,
disgusting.
get that baleful Strix out of here.
Yeah, it won't stop me. Anyway, yeah, so that's all the cards that we picked out for the stats, and we're gonna go ahead and pick out cards that we wanted to maybe put in the deck that we thought of after the deck was built. So what card did you pick out?
So this one just came to me and it requires some explanation. So it is from the newest set from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. The card is Tiny Bones Joins Up. So this is a 1 black legendary enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, any number of target players each discard a card. So in Commander, that means you're making all of your opponents discard a card. Seems like a small thing. I promise that it's not. That the second line is whenever a legendary creature enters the battlefield under your control, any number of target players each mill a card and lose a life. So I'm curious, having played this deck a little while now, if I could potentially move towards a more legendary based creature base. I think Zombie did a little counting. You came up with what'd you say, 16 or 17?
Something like that, yeah.
Well, 16 in the main deck, 1 in the command zone,
Yeah,
right?
I
So
think that's what it was.
17 legends, 70% of the deck is creatures. So out of 38 creatures, that is actually, it's still less than half. But only a little. So I'm wondering if I could run something like this. And actually, there's another joins up card from this set that is on color and would maybe be good. So, but I think the having a mill trigger go off whenever a legendary creature comes in has this really amazing capacity to kind of snowball the
Right.
wise Mothman. Is that so I cast a creature, everybody mills, everybody who milled a non-land card puts a +1/+1 counter on one of my
Yeah.
creatures, and if I can kind of have more than one creature go off, and this would trigger multiple times with a mass reanimation effect. So it's just something I'm kind of kicking around. I really wanted to try and include a new card, and I think this has got some possibility.
I mean, the fact that you're also recurring your creatures too, so you don't have to necessarily cast them. Like even
That's
like
right.
if you Scarab God them into play, they're still legendary.
That's right.
So like you might see the same card like 6 or 7 times, and you're getting that trigger 6 or 7 times. So, and the fact that it only costs one, it's the upfront cost isn't much for you. Like it doesn't really cost you
It's,
anything to do it.
it's true.
Hell, you could
And
even pull a land out for it.
I do think that I would want to up the amount of legendary creatures in my deck, but again, I built this deck out of opportunity. Like I built it
Yeah.
out of cards that I already had around. I'm pretty sure that I could find legendary versions of a lot of the things that are in here. Like there's definitely some things that I would want to keep that are non-legendary,
Oh, of
like
course.
Scorch Beast. And just off the top of my head, Gyre Sage, Kami of Whispered Hopes, but I really do think that if I could up the legendary count just a little, this and I'm getting other people's legendaries from their graveyards as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah.
So I'm curious on this one.
I think it could. It doesn't hurt to try it, right?
Right.
So
So how about you? What do you think I should add?
we talked about this several times. We talked about it in episodes before when we were talking about the Mothman. And the card I picked was the Get Rog Monster. We just love this card so much. Uh, he is a 5 mana legendary frog horror. With he's a 6/6 death touch. At the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice the Get Rog Monster unless you sacrifice a land, and you may play an additional land each turn. Whenever one or more land cards are put into the graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. The amount of cards you will draw from this thing, because it's not uh it's better for smaller instances of mill. Like if you have 10 rad counters and you mill 8 lands, you're only going to draw one card anyway because it's all
Right.
happening at once. But Mesmeric Orb, you're drawing every freaking time.
Yep.
So much card draw. Love this card to death. It should go in every green black. I try to squeeze this in every green and black deck I have. Doesn't always
Yeah, it
make the
really.
cut, but I love this card.
Honestly, I was so amazed when you put this on the list that it wasn't already in there. It seems very obvious that it should always have been in there. And again, there's rad toads in the game, so it really even thematically works. Everything about the Gitrog
Maybe
monster
that's why
fits
he's
into
so
this thing.
big.
Radiation,
Yeah,
probably.
we got we got the lore on the Gitrog monster. Now you got to
You heard
just
it here first.
ride him into victory.
Yep. That's a couple episodes from now. We'll get to that.
Oh, right. Sorry about that. Spoiler warning. Alrighty. I think now is a good time to wrap everything up.
Yes, friends, opponents, war never changes, but it is time for us to go. So thank you so very kindly for spending time with us here on the Head Games Commander podcast. Remember that you can support this show and all of our other content by watching this and other videos on our YouTube page, by checking out our streams on Twitch and YouTube, links in the description.
But before we scoop things up, we want to hear from you guys in the think tank. Who is your favorite commander from the Fallout precons? Let us know in the comments, and as always, thank you for playing along with us, and have a wonderful day. Bye.